I caught the sound of a chainsaw before I even saw them, 3 guys in neon vests standing under my pine tree, one already pulling the starter cord. The biggest one looked up at me and said, "We've got orders from the HOA to take it down." I didn't say a word. I just stepped between him and the trunk and pulled out my phone. I grew up in this house. My dad planted that pine tree when I was 6, said it was my job to keep it alive longer than him. Back then it was just a skinny little thing, barely taller than me, staked with 2 pieces of rebar and a rubber strap. He'd water it with the hose every evening after work, even when he was dead tired, and made me do the same when I started getting old enough to complain about things. That tree was our project, our silent handshake across decades. My dad was big on that kind of thing, stuff that lasted. He built the workbench in the garage himself, used old oak from a barn teardown. It's still there, by the way, with his initials burned into the corner. When he died, I sanded and resealed it, but left the burn mark. I figured it was like leaving his name on the deed. The house passed to me after he passed, and I never really thought about moving. People in the neighborhood came and went, but I stayed. I like quiet. I like working with my hands. I work for the city doing arborist work, trimming municipal trees, assessing storm damage, writing up reports no one reads. It's not glamorous, but it suits me. I know trees. I know their moods, their disease patterns, how the bark should feel when it's healthy. That pine in my yard? It's perfect. Not diseased, not overgrown, not a threat. 65 feet tall, maybe a little more. A textbook example of a well-maintained eastern white. I prune it every few years like clockwork. I mulch the base with my own compost mix. It gives good shade in the summer, especially late afternoon. Birds love it. There's a pair of jays that come back every year and build a nest up near the top, and I swear it's the same pair because one of them has a busted feather that sticks out like a bad comb-over. HOA didn't exist when I moved in. They formed about 5 years after, once the newer homes popped up on the north side of the development. You know how it starts. Someone wants a gate, someone else wants prettier signs, and boom, you've got a bunch of volunteers in polo shirts running around with clipboards and self-importance. I never paid much attention to them at first. They left me alone, and I left them alone. I didn't go to meetings. I didn't put out Christmas lights. I mowed my yard, kept the gutters clean, didn't make trouble. They weren't thrilled that my house didn't match the beige-on-beige paint scheme the newer builds had, but they couldn't do much about it because mine was technically grandfathered in. Same with my gravel driveway, same with the tree, or so I thought. First time they came after me, it was with a letter. White envelope, HOA logo in the corner, tucked into my mailbox like it was just another water bill. Inside was this overly formal notice about excessive foliage encroaching on adjacent property lines and impact on solar access for neighboring residents. It was so ridiculous I laughed out loud. My pine tree apparently was casting too much shade on someone else's grass. I figured it had to be a mistake, maybe a new intern clicking the wrong box in some app. So I called the number at the bottom, and, of course, I got voicemail. I left a message explaining that the tree was fully on my land, healthy, and had been there longer than most of the street. Week later, a second letter shows up. This one was less polite. It said I had 30 days to resolve the vegetation issue, or face fines of $50 a day. They used the word non-compliant. Love that one. Makes it sound like I'm smuggling plutonium in the shed. That's when I found out who filed the complaint. Brett Norris. Lives directly behind me. Moved in maybe 8 months earlier, with a wife who never waves back and a backyard that looks like a catalog. The kind of guy who power washes his driveway twice a week and puts turf over real grass. Turns out Brett wanted to install solar panels and said the shade from my tree would negatively impact energy efficiency. I'm not against solar. I've got a couple panels myself, actually, mounted up on my garage, but this was absurd. That tree casts a soft patch of shade in the late afternoon, and even then, only in certain months. I walked over to his place, knocked on the door, and tried to be civil. He opened it wearing a golf shirt and that look people have when they answer the door and already wish you hadn't knocked. I said, "Hey, Brett. Got your message. Kinda. Just wanted to see if we could talk about the tree thing." He smiled like a shark learning to fake empathy. "Yeah, it's really nothing personal, Nick. It's just, look, I've got these solar plans, right? And that tree, it's just not ideal." "It's been there over 40 years, I said. "Totally get it. But technically, the HOA does allow us to file for obstruction if a plant or structure reduces home efficiency, and we're all trying to be more energy conscious now, you know?" I swear he thought that was some kind of mic drop. "I don't think this qualifies as obstruction," I said. "I had a certified arborist report done a year ago. It's healthy, safe, and within all clearance lines." He actually laughed. "Well, I guess we'll let the board sort it out." That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a campaign. Not long after that little doorstep conversation with Brett, the fines started showing up like clockwork. $50 a day, stacked up in neat little lines on monthly HOA statements. It felt like I was paying rent to keep my own damn tree. I appealed, twice, sent in documentation, photos, even dug up that arborist report and printed it out like I was defending a murder trial. The HOA didn't respond, not directly. They just sent more notices. One of them had the word final underlined 3 times in red, which felt a little dramatic. Then came the morning with the chainsaws. I just poured coffee and was halfway through feeding the cat when I heard the sound, low and mechanical, like an old lawnmower choking on gravel. I stepped outside and saw 3 guys in neon vests standing around my pine tree like it owed them money. One of them already had a rope slung around the lowest branch. Another had a chainsaw in hand, yanking the pull cord like he was trying to start a lawn war. I didn't say a word at first, just stood there in my flannel and boots, mug still in hand. The lead guy glanced at me and nodded like we were about to agree on something. "We're with the HOA," he said, "here to carry out the tree order." "There is no order," I said, not yelling, just flat. "Get off my property." He held up a piece of paper like it was a golden ticket. "This says we're allowed to begin removal." I took it, read it. It was a recommendation, not a removal permit, not signed, not even dated. It was basically a note that said, "Nick's tree sucks, please do something about it." I handed it back. "You fire up that saw, I call the cops," I said. The guy shrugged and looked at the others. They didn't argue, just packed up slowly like they had all the time in the world and would be back later. One of them spat a sunflower seed into my mulch. I still haven't forgiven that. About an hour later, I got a voicemail from Karen Scott, president of the HOA. Sweet, sing-song voice, the kind that sounds like it's constantly scolding a toddler. "Hi, Nick. I heard there was a little misunderstanding this morning. I just want to remind you that non-compliance does affect your standing with the board, and continued resistance may lead to escalated measures. Let me know if you'd like to come in and talk this over like neighbors." Talk it over. Like neighbors. I didn't call back. Instead, over the next few days, the pressure turned up. A bright orange tag appeared on my mailbox saying I was under aesthetic review. They flagged me for having mismatched patio chairs. Then I got a warning about unapproved modifications to my fence because I'd replaced 2 boards with different wood. I'd been meaning to stain it anyway, but now it felt like a joke, like I was the clown in a petty parade and the whole HOA board was throwing pies. Even my neighbor across the street, an older guy named Doug, pulled me aside one morning and said, "Look, Nick, I know the tree means a lot to you, but sometimes it's easier to just play ball. These people, they don't stop." And that pissed me off more than anything. Not the HOA, not the fines, not even the damn chainsaw. It was that people just expected me to give in. Like standing your ground was somehow the wrong thing now. I'd lived in that house longer than most of them had been in the zip code. I wasn't about to be muscled out by a woman who handed out rulebooks like Halloween candy and a guy who couldn't tell a pine from a poplar if it hit him in the face. So I stopped waiting for their next move, and I started making mine. I really did try to go the calm, reasonable route. I wasn't looking for a fight, I just didn't want to lose a tree that had been in my family longer than the HOA even existed. So I put together everything I could think of. Arborist reports, dated photos, boundary line surveys showing the tree well inside my property, notes on seasonal shade. I even included a little cover letter that said basically, "Hey, I'd like to settle this like adults." I dropped it off at the HOA office. Well, the converted guest room in Karen's house that she calls the board headquarters. It had a little sign on the door and everything, like she was running a startup. Didn't hear back for a week. Then came a letter, this one full of phrases like remains in violation, continued failure to comply, and my favorite, undermining the authority of the board. I'm not even kidding. It sounded like I was leading some underground rebellion instead of just refusing to chop down a damn pine tree. So I tried calling Karen directly. She picked up on the 3rd ring, answered like I was interrupting something sacred. "Nick," she said, "I was just about to call you." "Good," I said. I wanted to talk in person, maybe find a way through this without lawyers or drama. There was this pause, like she was deciding whether to pretend to be human or not. Then, "Well, the board has already reviewed your appeal and found it lacking. We have to be fair to everyone, Nick. The rules are the rules." "Karen, there's no rule that says I have to cut down a healthy tree because one guy wants more sun for his turf grass." "I'm not going to debate with you," she snapped. "You've been uncooperative from the start, and quite frankly, some of your neighbors are starting to express concern about your attitude." That one got under my skin. She said it like I'd been walking around waving a shotgun at mailmen. I knew what she meant, though. Your attitude meant I wasn't rolling over. After that, I talked to a lawyer, not a high-powered type, just a quiet guy named Martin who I'd helped out once when he had storm damage and a tree down on his rental. He offered me a discount rate, which was good because I wasn't exactly in a position to burn cash. Martin went through everything and said the same thing I'd been thinking. None of this held up legally. The tree was on my property, healthy, and not violating any local ordinances. But here's the thing. The HOA didn't have to be legal to be a pain in the ass. They just had to wear you down. The fines, they could keep adding up. The liens, possible if it escalated. And court, expensive, even if I'd win. That's the game, not legality, attrition. So we sent a formal cease and desist letter, told them any further action would be considered harassment. And for about 2 weeks, things got quiet. No new letters, no fines, no angry orange tags zip-tied to my fence. Then the neighborhood started talking. Little things. Someone left a note on my door, unsigned, that said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." One woman I'd never spoken to walked past while I was pulling weeds and muttered, "Such a shame when people forget they live in a community." That's when it hit me. I wasn't just fighting the HOA anymore, I was becoming that guy. The one the newsletter warns you about, the holdout, the non-compliant. But I still wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just tired. Tired of defending a tree like it was some kind of criminal. Tired of the fake smiles. Tired of pretending this was about anything other than control. And maybe that's why I started knocking on doors. I didn't plan it, I wasn't gathering an army, I just needed to know. Was I crazy, or was this as stupid as it felt? What I found changed everything. I didn't start out looking for dirt on Karen. I just wanted to know if anybody else actually gave a damn about the tree, if the whole neighborhood really thought I was being difficult, or if this was just Brett and Karen stirring the pot. So I started talking to people. Casual conversations. At the mailbox, on walks, wherever I could catch someone without making it feel like an ambush. I'd bring up the tree gently, just to test the waters. And every single person I asked said the same thing. "Oh, I love that tree. It keeps our house cool in the summer. The birds in it are beautiful, please don't cut it down." One lady even told me she used to sit under it with her grandkid when he visited because the shade was just right, not too dark. Nobody said it was a problem. In fact, a couple people seemed surprised it had even become an issue. But what really got my attention was when I talked to Mrs. Harper, Linda, who's been here longer than almost anyone. She's sharp, the kind of old lady who's got a better memory than people half her age. I asked if she remembered Karen ever doing something similar, coming after someone's property under the banner of HOA rules. Linda got this look like she'd been waiting for someone to ask. Then she told me about Mrs. Crow. "You remember her, right?" she said. "Lived on Arbor Way. Widow, quiet, sweet as can be. Had that old wooden pergola in the backyard?" I nodded. Barely, but yeah, I remembered the house. Well, Karen came after her hard, said the pergola was structurally unsound, which was crap. It had stood for decades, but she piled on fines, and eventually the woman gave up and moved to live with her daughter. Yeah, said the stress wasn't worth it. That pissed me off. But then Linda added something else. Funny thing though, the place went up for sale 2 months later, and guess which agency listed it? I didn't have to guess. "She gets a kickback?" I asked. "Her niece runs the office," Linda said. "She doesn't hide it, and that's not the only one. I've got a whole drawer of meeting notes and newsletters if you're curious." Turns out Karen had a habit. She'd target older or quieter homeowners with questionable citations, stuff that couldn't really be fought easily, just enough to make people tired. Then, once the owners gave up or sold out, the homes would magically show up listed by the same 2 or 3 realtors, usually her niece's firm or her friend's little side hustle. I spent the next couple days digging. I started pulling the public sale records, county database, real boring stuff. But the pattern was there. At least 5 houses in the last 3 years had gone that route. HOA pressure, sudden sale, same listing agency. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was flipping it. Every fake citation, every orange tag, every chain of petty fines. She'd weaponize the rulebook to run people off and make a profit. And now, the tree? That wasn't about solar panels. That was about leverage, about reminding people who's in charge. It stopped being about the pine the second I realized that. This was bigger than me. Once I knew what she was doing, really doing, it stopped being about saving my tree and started being about saving the neighborhood from Karen. And that meant I had to stop thinking like a guy trying to defend himself and start thinking like a guy building a case. I wasn't going to beat her by yelling louder or writing angrier letters. That's what she wanted. Emotional, reactive, messy. She thrived on making people feel cornered and crazy. So I went the other way. I got quiet. Methodical. I made coffee, cleared off the workbench in the garage, and laid everything out like I was prepping for surgery. Linda was a huge help. She dropped off an old accordion folder stuffed with HOA newsletters, board meeting notes, and a couple of those glossy community improvement surveys that no one ever filled out. She wasn't some political mastermind. She just kept things, and those things told stories. Then I started printing. Property transfers, sales listings, name matches between buyers and the real estate firms, screenshots of LinkedIn profiles that showed exactly who Karen's niece was and who she worked with. I cross-referenced everything. I went full CSI on that folder. I also started taking notes on the current HOA violations going around, not just mine, others too. Turns out I wasn't the only one getting little orange courtesy tags. A guy named Malcolm had gotten one for unapproved driveway edging, and another woman, Tanya, got fined because her hose was visible from the street. That's not a joke. A hose. I started quietly talking to those people, not to stir anything up, just asking, "Hey, has Karen or anyone else from the board followed up with you about that?" Most of them shrugged and said no, but they also said they felt bullied. They were just too tired or too busy to deal with it. That's what Karen counted on. Then I made copies of everything and handed it to Martin, my lawyer. He reviewed it all and said, "This is either the worst HOA president I've ever seen or the smartest." And then he smiled, which is rare for him. But she's not smarter than paper trails. Next step was prepping a formal petition. HOA bylaws said that if we got signatures from at least 25% of the homeowners, we could call for a vote of no confidence in the board president. That meant I needed a dozen solid neighbors and some momentum. I knew I couldn't go door to door and just rant about corruption. That would make me look crazy. So I drafted a calm, short letter. With bulletproof language. Just facts. Just questions. It didn't scream mutiny. It said, "We deserve answers." Then I printed off packets, one for each homeowner, with a cover letter, a list of citations Karen had issued in the last year, sales history from affected homes, and a simple form at the back with a checkbox. Would you support a vote to evaluate the conduct of the current HOA president? I dropped them off quietly over the weekend. No speeches, no drama, just walked my block with a messenger bag and kept my head down. Then I waited. I didn't know if it would work. I really didn't. Most of the people here were good folks, but they were tired or busy or scared of rocking the boat. Karen had spent years training them to stay small and compliant. I wasn't sure if they'd stick their necks out for me. But then I got a knock on my door. It was Tanya, the one with the hose violation. She held up the packet and said, "I've been waiting for someone to do this." And just like that, the first domino fell. It started with Tanya, but it didn't stop there. By the end of that first week, 7 people had brought the packets back to me with boxes checked and little handwritten notes in the margins. Stuff like, "Thank you for speaking up," and "She fined me for a broken gate latch. This has been going on too long." It wasn't loud. Nobody was out marching down the sidewalk with torches, but it was steady and growing. A few neighbors I hadn't even approached came by on their own, said they'd heard what I was doing and wanted to help. One guy, Dennis, printed 5 more copies of the packet and handed them out on his street. Linda kept a little table outside her garage with a jar of pens and blank signature forms, like a lemonade stand for rebellion. And Brett, he got real quiet. I think he thought he could lean on Karen and she'd make the whole tree thing disappear by steamrolling me with bureaucracy. But now she had bigger problems, and suddenly the shade in his yard didn't seem quite so offensive. He even waved at me once, though it looked like it physically hurt him to do it. We crossed the 25% mark in just under 2 weeks. Martin helped me draft the official motion to call for a vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. We submitted it exactly by the book. No drama, no shouting match. I dropped it off in her mailbox with a little sticky note. "This is still a community, Karen. We just decided to act like one." She didn't respond. But a couple days later, the HOA email account sent out an official notice. Emergency Community Meeting, Board Discussion, and Leadership Review, which is HOA code for shit just got real. The meeting was in the clubhouse. They usually get maybe 10 people at those things. We had over 40. Karen showed up late, wearing a scarf and big sunglasses like she was trying to sneak into her own party. She looked calm, but that kind of tight-jawed calm that only works if nobody asks questions. Unfortunately for her, they did. I didn't lead the charge. That was important. I answered when asked, showed the documents when prompted, but I let the neighbors do the talking. Tanya spoke first, then Malcolm, then Linda, then Dennis. They talked about intimidation, selective enforcement, shady listings, the way the fines came in waves right before people sold their homes. One guy, soft-spoken engineer named Roger, read off sale dates and matching real estate firms like he was presenting a case to a jury. He even brought a small projector. I didn't ask him to, but damn, it helped. Karen tried to hold it together, said things like, "These are isolated incidents, and the board always acts in the best interest of the community." She even tried to pivot into blaming me, said I'd turned this into a personal vendetta because I couldn't handle a minor landscaping request. But she miscalculated one thing. Nobody gave a damn about my tree anymore. Because this wasn't about a tree now. This was about control, about how she'd been running the neighborhood like a private kingdom, picking favorites, playing games with people's homes, and calling it order. Someone called for the vote, secret ballots, simple yes or no. It wasn't close. She was removed as president by a wide margin, and before she could even finish collecting her things, someone, pretty sure it was Roger, motioned to amend the board charter to require financial disclosures from all current and future members. The room clapped. No one cheered or whooped, just polite, sustained clapping, which somehow felt even more brutal. I walked home through the dark, and for the first time in a long time, it actually felt like my neighborhood again. The fallout came quick after the vote. I figured Karen would try to go out quietly, maybe spin the whole thing like she was stepping down for personal reasons. But apparently she didn't have that kind of grace in her system. She sent out this wild neighborhood email, 6 paragraphs long, passive-aggressive from the subject line down, claimed she'd been victimized by misinformation, and that a small, hostile faction had weaponized the HOA against her. Most people just deleted it. But someone forwarded it to Martin, and he nearly laughed coffee out of his nose. He said she just admitted in writing that the board wasn't acting in a neutral capacity. A few more clicks, and he fired off a formal request to the city to review the HOA's previous violations. Not because we wanted a full-blown investigation, but because that kind of letter has a way of getting everyone's attention. Then things got public. Roger uploaded a full breakdown of the HOA abuse patterns to the neighborhood site. Dates, fines, sale listings, realtor connections. People started commenting, sharing their own stories. Screenshots popped up. One woman uploaded an audio recording of Karen threatening her with daily fines unless she removed a garden gnome her granddaughter gave her. A gnome. It went mildly viral in our little corner of the suburbs. Someone even started a thread on a regional Facebook group titled HOA Tyrant Finally Gets the Boot, and it spiraled from there. I kept my head down through all of it. I didn't post anything, didn't gloat. I just answered questions when people asked. I gave Martin the green light to share any documents he thought were helpful. Let the facts do the talking. But the craziest part? The local paper picked it up. Just a small blurb in the Sunday edition, buried after the classifieds, but it was there. Neighborhood president removed amid allegations of abuse of power and improper real estate dealings. There was a grainy photo of Karen from a 4th of July BBQ a few years ago, holding a sparkler and scowling at the camera. I clipped it out and stuck it on the fridge, just for the irony of it all. Brett, for his part, disappeared from the conversation completely. No more complaints about the tree, no more passive-aggressive landscaping notes. I think he realized he'd backed the wrong horse and decided to sit down before someone handed him a shovel. And Karen? Last I heard, she was taking time for herself. That's code, by the way, for nobody wants to talk to her at the grocery store anymore. The new board took over with a refreshingly boring tone. They focused on potholes and mailbox maintenance. Nobody talked about tree shadows or patio furniture colors. It was glorious, peaceful. I even got a little thank you card from Tanya, said her hose was back on the hook and her blood pressure was down 10 points. I hung it on the wall in the garage next to my dad's old pruning saw. Funny what counts as a win these days. A few weeks after everything settled, I was out in the yard pruning some of the lower branches on the pine. Nothing major, just some cleanup. The sun was coming through in that lazy, late afternoon way it does when it's not in a rush to go anywhere. I stood back for a second, looked up at the tree. It was still strong, still reaching, still standing exactly where it was supposed to be. I don't know why, but I suddenly remembered the way my dad used to stand under it with a cold beer in one hand and a pair of clippers in the other, like it was some kind of sacred ritual. He'd never say much, just nod at the sky and mutter, "Still growing." Yeah, still growing. I replaced the mulch around the base with a fresh layer and raked it smooth. Nothing fancy, just enough to show I was still paying attention. A little later, I was sitting on the front steps, drinking my own beer, when the kid from 2 doors down, Eli, I think, rode past on his bike. He circled back and stopped at the edge of my yard, kind of awkward. He said, "My mom told me you saved that tree." I smiled and said, "Nah, it saved itself. I just got in the way." He looked up at it like it was a skyscraper, then asked, "How old is it?" I told him. He nodded like that meant something to him and rode off without saying another word. I stayed there a little longer, watching the shadows stretch across the yard, the kind of shade people used to thank me for before it turned into some kind of political statement. Now it was just shade again, peaceful, regular, unbothered. I never took the HOA letters down from the garage wall. I kept them there next to the thank you card and the newspaper clipping. Not because I needed the reminder, but because sometimes it's good to know exactly what you stood up for and who tried to knock it down. I don't expect the tree to live forever, nothing does. But as long as I'm around, it stays. That much I can promise. And if they try again, well, I've still got copies.